Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Naturally Cool, our second online seminar for the High Life Expo. I'm your host tonight, Kate Nicolazzo from Let Me Be Frank, and it's a real pleasure to invite everyone here. We've partnered with Strata Communities Association of Victoria to bring the High Life Expo to everyone living, working, managing apartments and units who often kind of forgotten when we talk about sustainability and climate resilient solutions. So we wanted to make sure that missing cohort were receiving some really, I guess, wonderful and specific and targeted information and advice that helps them live a more sustainable, healthy, comfortable and lovely existence in their homes. Before we get too far underway, I'd just like to say obviously Woman Jaka and welcome to everyone, and acknowledge that today we're broadcasting from the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung lands of the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present. For us, working with First Nations communities is a really critical part of what we do at Let Me Be Frank. We work a lot in that space of climate justice and social justice more broadly. So we stand with our First Nations communities and seek to, I guess, honour that connection that they have to country, but also to community and to culture as well. 1% of all our income goes to pay the rent, and a further 1% goes to 1% for the planet as well, for environmental charities. So that's one small token, I guess, that we play, but obviously a big part of what we like to do is also for people to reflect on and think about what country they're joining us from today and understand and know what land they're on. These sorts of events and activities are never, you can't get very far without some support from some incredible sponsors. So I'd just like to thank, these are the gold sponsors for the High Life Expo. So we've got Melbourne Building Management, Marybeck City Council, the City of Yarra and the City of Stonington. So extend our extreme thanks to those organisations, and a whole heap of other organisations have come on board as silver sponsors and sponsored with financial and in-kind support. Plus, if you go to the High Life Expo website, you can see all the other partners that have been involved either as speakers or were stall holders on the main event that we had on the 1st of June, which is really incredible. So we've got just an hour together tonight. So I was saying to the speakers just before we started that I know there's going to be a lot of questions. So we're going to make sure we stick to time. So we do leave time for questions and answers. But these are our speakers tonight. So it's a real, I guess a plethora of green gurus here for us to talk to about being naturally cool in apartments and units going forward. So we've got Dr. Thami Croeser, who's a research fellow at RMIT. Thami posts some of my favourite things on LinkedIn. So if you follow people on LinkedIn, if you're ever on there, he's got incredible insight, really interesting articles and sharing lots of his research. He's been researching and helping green Melbourne for many, many years and has incredible insights to share tonight. We've got Janette Corcoran, who's the chair of the Victoria Point Owners Corporation, and also a committee member for the Owners Corporation Network. And Janette has been instrumental in helping us put on the High Life Expo. But tonight she's here to tell us about the work she's been doing in greening our own building, which is amazing. Thanks. Welcome, Janette. And Geoff Hurd, who's the Managing Director of Fytogreen. And he's been installing green infrastructure in apartment buildings across Australia for 22 years. So he's got really beautiful photos of all the projects that they've been doing to install greenery in apartment buildings all across Australia, which is great. And then Jane Ward is the Urban Agriculture Facilitator for Yarra City Council. And she's going to tell us a little bit, they've got a My Smart Garden, because obviously there's the greening that we're doing for cooling, but there's also an opportunity here for food production in apartments as well. So it'd be great to hear about that program as well from Jane. Now, just in terms of using the Zoom software, we've got two kind of functions that we'll be using today. One is the Q&A section. So if you've got questions that come up for the panelists as they go, please type them into the chat. We'll do a bit of a mixture of typing our responses, but also as we get to the end in the Q&A section, I'll go through and pose those questions to the panel. But if you've got resources or ideas or links, those sorts of things that you'd like to share, feel free to pop those into the chat function, because we'll be producing this. Obviously, this will be a recorded webinar that'll go onto the High Life Expo website, but some of those resources, guides, any of that sort of stuff that you might have seen or used in your work, can actually go into the resources section of the High Life Expo website as well. So the chat function and the Q&A, so if you scroll into your little bar, which will either be at the top of your screen or at the bottom, you can sort of see the mute and all those sorts of buttons, but there's a chat and a Q&A function. So hopefully that all makes sense to everyone as we go through. Now I'm going to hand over to Thami, who's going to drive his own slides. So I'll stop sharing briefly and hand over to you, Thami.
Alrighty, thanks very much. I will get this sharing going and we can hop into it. Oh, okay. Oh, spoilers. Cool. All right. Can everyone see that?
And indeed.
Good. Great. So having worked in urban greening for the best part of a decade now, when I travel, I love to take photos of the things that I see. And I've seen so many interesting kinds of greening over the years. And I've certainly probably been left with the confidence that whatever you have, whatever building you have, whatever apartment you have, there is some kind of greenery that you can have on it. So what I'd love to do with this introduction is just give you a sense from some of the examples that I've seen digging through my photo albums this week of what you could do. So it'll be a bit of like a typology of urban greening. So we're going to jump into that in a moment. But first, why do this kind of urban greening? One of the great things is studies have shown it's good for your mental health. There is evidence that looking at green views actually helps us recover from stress. There's lots of studies about this kind of stuff. But for a lot of people, it's also just aesthetic enjoyment. We like it because it's beautiful. And certainly I enjoy the greening on my property very much. And if you invest in greening on yours, it probably will improve your enjoyment of your property. If you're in an older building that's got a north or west facing facade or even a rooftop that's not insulated, especially, you can save significantly on energy bills by having it shaded. Neighbourhood character as well is quite a significant factor. This is a picture of Coromandel Place, which was a pretty dingy laneway a few years back. We got some greening into it and it's got a better feel. And if you're trying to sort of change the feel of your street, this is an option for you. And probably linked to that, studies have shown that a bit of greenery around you can improve your property values and your rental appeal. Now, the precise amount of that is quite hard to predict, but I guess the reason I say that is because some of these things will cost money to do. Some of these are going to be quite a bit of effort for you. I urge you to see them as an investment, either in your own enjoyment of your property or, the attractiveness of that property. So let's get into the types of greening that you can do. Let's start with high-tech green walls. These are, quite advanced hydroponic systems. They tend to be proprietary. And what you've got there is vertical racking that get pre-grown plants put into them. So usually from day one, they're an absolute knockout. This one that you can see is in Brisbane, and it's just epic to see it. Like, the photos don't do it justice. They are also probably some of the most advanced things you can do in urban greening, so they're really not to be done by amateurs. If you have a cousin who's invented a green wall system and he wants to try it on your house, I probably would politely decline. Now, part of the reason for that is because when they go wrong, they really do go wrong. But there are so many great examples of long-lived green walls that have been done well by experts. I quite like this one in London because it completely covers the building, but you don't have to travel to London to see really good green walls. We've got this pair of absolute crackers in London. They're really quite big. They're on the side of the Medibank building down in Docklands. I think they've probably been around 7-8 years now. I think that they're Geoff's work, so you might hear about them later, but really impressive walls. You can go and see them right now if you want to. Or if you don't want to venture into Docklands, you can go down to Myers Place. This is one that I worked on many years ago with Geoff, getting a green wall on the side of a pub. And remarkably, this one's north facing, so it cops a lot of direct sunshine, and yet it's survived numerous heat waves. So plenty of great options in terms of green walls if you want that really lush look. If you don't have as much money, but you have a lot of love and time, you can do a low-tech green wall, like this beautiful one that I saw in France. Of course, these are plants that take a little while, whether they're twining up a cable, whether they're climbing a trellis, whether they're climbing directly on the wall. You can get them up as quickly as sort of 3 years if you really invest in making the soil nice and watering them well, but they tend to take a little while. But the result that they can produce is quite impressive, as I'll show you soon. A lot of people worry that these things will turn their homes into Cambodia, and they'll just be like crumbling temples immediately. It actually takes a very long time for most of these creeping plants to damage a building, and most species simply do not do damage. So I tend to discourage use of things like English ivy, but aside from that, most of them are pretty safe. And the examples I'm going to show you often use Boston ivy, which is quite safe indeed. This is a very simple example that I just thought was really pretty, probably quite slow because it was just put right into the footpath. But if you drive down Domain Road in South Yarra, and this is a private residence, but you can see it from the street. I won't give you the address, but it's spectacular. And this creeper has completely covered the building over the course of what's possibly 5 to 10 years, but it's incredible to look at, and the building's quite all right. You can also get flowers on green walls. This one was in Lisbon. I'd probably call this one a little bit unruly, but trust me, when you turn the corner, it's still quite spectacular. If you want a sort of more of a tidy look, you can use things like cables to manage it. Wisteria likes to twine along cables, and this wisteria is flowering in London in a very beautiful but very orderly way. So you have loads of options if you're prepared to put in like that sort of 3 to 5 year window for a creeping or twining green wall. This one's on my campus at RMIT. It's only 3 years old, but it's got good soil volume, so it's doing okay. And lastly, if you're spending a lot of money on graffiti management, this is a train track in Copenhagen, and a lot of other bits are tagged. The bits that have these creepers are doing really well. Moving on to green roofs. If you've got a flat, strong roof, you can potentially have a green roof. There are a couple of considerations that you need to think about. You probably are going to want to talk to a structural engineer because even a little bit of wet soil is quite heavy. And a lot of councils have rules that say you can't overlook people's private gardens or look into their, bedrooms or lounges and things. So think about a couple of those factors, but there's more flat roofs out there than you'd expect. And definitely, if you get a chance to go to Burnley, I believe this garden is largely private. This is where I studied about 10 years ago. And they have a demonstration green roof, which shows different greening that's possible at different depths. And some of the really shallow stuff on the left with succulents is still very impressive with only sort of 10, 15 centimeters of soil. So you can get quite impressive results even if your building is not exceedingly strong. Just get proper advice on that. If you want to see a really impressive rooftop garden, this one is at Docklands again, Collins Street. You got the sculptural stairwell, and you end up on this park, and you can probably tell this one's a render, but the reality is it's there and it's stunning. It's got big, healthy trees. So if you've got the structural strength, you can have a rooftop park if you want it. Coming on to balcony and wall-mounted planting, this jasmine in Spain really caught my eye, and it was huge. It kept going for part of the street. You can do loads with balconies, but I found that the most impressive buildings that I've seen are often ones where you've got consistency across the balconies. For example, that one at the very beginning from my opening slide, those were trees growing on people's balconies, but you don't have to have trees. You can have something as simple as just 2 or 3 species of quite hardy plants, but if you plant them consistently, like on this building in Tokyo, you can have quite a nice piece of street appeal just with balcony planting. You can even do things just as simple as this. This is in Melbourne. Apparently there's a permitting system now that allows you to do this kind of stuff. You can have hanging plants and keep it very simple. I probably wouldn't say Melbourne's as good as London at it, though. London's really good at its flower boxes, and probably my favorite effect that you can get with flower boxes is this one, this corner pub, which absolutely makes the whole street when you're coming down it. So those are just simple pots with tough flowering plants in them, nothing too fancy. Setbacks and footpaths, I will speed through because it's fairly obvious. If you've got a little bit of footpath space that's your property, you can do surprising things with it. And there is now a permitting system if you're in the city of Melbourne to put pots on footpaths. So whether it's a little raised section that you have plants in that are establishing, this one's quite young, but they can get quite impressive. Whether it's plants in pots on footpaths in Guildford Lane, there's loads of ways you can do it and have that appeal on the street. And certainly Guildford Lane is one of the more Instagrammed space in Melbourne. It's worth going to have a look at, and it's very, very simple, very low tech. Now, I've just got a minute left, so I'll go quickly through this, but road to park conversions, I think, are the exciting frontier here. And of course, roads are not your land. They're generally council land, or sometimes they're state land. But if you're willing to lobby your councillors and push them a little bit and show them that you're actually willing to give up a couple of parking spaces or a lane on your street, you can get spectacular results. I went to London recently to see one called Alfred Place Gardens, where the locals did give up most of the street. They still have a lane, there's still a loading zone, everything else has been turned into a park, and that park is beautifully well used. And similarly, City of Yarra is really actually quite good at that themselves. They've just opened Otter Street in Collingwood. Essentially, that's just the end of a road that's been taken. You can see where the road was if you look out at the sort of end of the street. It's a really well-used park, and if you lobby, you might be able to get one of these for yourself. I'm going to close by sharing one of my favorite resources for urban greening. It's starting to get a bit long in the tooth. It might be from 2015 or 2016 now, but the Growing Green Guide is a how-to guide for urban greening on buildings, and it's completely free. So I highly recommend you dig into that if you're thinking about doing a bit of greening on your building. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely beautiful. Thanks, Thami. That is great. I don't know, one of my kids when they were first born had this incredible book called Belonging. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's developed by an architect, but it basically tells the story of a street being closed and the whole kind of recreation of the neighborhood without any words. It's all just pictures. It was one of my kids' favorite books when he was growing up, and it was just creates that incredible sense of community and connection, and having that shared sort of green space. It's just absolutely beautiful. In your why as well earlier, I remember reading recently that people talked about peace, so community safety and peace. So greenery actually has a direct impact around that as well. So yet another tick in the box for why to think about more urban greening. So thank you so much for that presentation. Don't forget the Q&A is going to be held at the end. So if you've got questions, type them in to the Q&A section for Thami, and I think Amy's popped the link in the chat for downloading that guide. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen for Janette. There we go. Seamless, Janette. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. And good evening, everyone. So I'm here tonight in my role as chair of a Tier 1 owners corporation in Docklands. Docklands seems to get a few mentions this evening, which is great. And for those not familiar, a Tier 1 building are those buildings with over 100 occupiable lots. Victoria Point, which is the building I'm talking about, has over 500 occupiable lots. So there's over 1,000 people that live in my building. And I'm here to talk about one major greening infrastructure project that our OC has undertaken, which we call Greening the Podium. Next. And this is a collage which I took over the weekend, showing our 5 new garden beds, which were constructed and completed almost a year ago. So these are showing almost 1 year's growth. We constructed 5 garden beds. We planted 38 new trees and over 5,000 new native plantings from a palette that was selected specifically for Docklands. And we're very pleased to report that we've had an unexpectedly low attrition rate. The greatest peril, unfortunately, is actually, it comes down to pets and what owners permit their pets to do, and also people's cigarette litter. Next slide. So this was the site that we started with. As I said, it's Victoria Point in Docklands. It's on the corner of Harbour Esplanade and Burke Street. It's a complex. It incorporates the residential tower, which I mentioned, the Quest Apartments, Bendigo Bank, and about 20 retail outlets. And it abuts Marvel Stadium. So if you've ever walked from Southern Cross down to Harbour Esplanade, you've walked through Victoria Point complex. The land that we have is privately owned, but publicly accessible. Next slide. So this is what we started with. Large expanses of concrete. And if you're familiar with Docklands Stadium, you would be familiar with the concourse. So it's not all grey. The developer very kindly coloured some bits red. We believe that the idea there was to help with wayfinding, but it doesn't really seem to have helped in reality. Now, the point of significance here too is I've included a heat island map. And you can see that most of the area there is in the severe, with even at the some parts around the stadium are in the extreme range. Also, a point to note is that we did have existing garden beds. And in the top right-hand corner is one of the garden beds, and you can see that it didn't thrive, has never thrived. And in fact, when the soil was taken out of it, the landscape gardeners told us that there was not one worm in the entire 5 garden beds that were there previously. So it was mainly full of building rubble with some soil put on top, and nothing thrived and nothing could thrive. So next slide. It's a challenging site, and every site has its own challenges. Ours are that, as I said, we abut Marvel Stadium, which means sometimes the area can be host 50 to 60,000 people, such as with a Harry Styles concert. Other things, it's that it's a daily commute zone. So pre-COVID, it had up to 5,000 people transiting that area. And then also at sometimes it could be absolutely deserted. Now, each of those different uses has implications for safety. And we really had to look at that when we were designing our garden beds. What we didn't want to do was plant something that could be perceived as not enhancing safety. So people essentially hiding behind bushes. It's also a 4th-story site, so technically a rooftop garden. And as Thami mentioned before, weight is a huge factor that we had to take into consideration. And also for us, access issues. The access to the site is actually off Latrobe Street, so we had to coordinate all our deliveries. And just to add another thing into the mix, these 2 projects happened at exactly the same time. And I mean Marble Redevelopment Stage 1 and our small project as well. Also, it's a very windy site. As people say, it's a waterfront. It's going to be windy, and it is windy. Next slide. So in terms of construction, this was our project. Lasted 15 weeks. Started, as I said, November 22, finished almost a year ago, July 23. Delays for 5 weeks, which we were very happy about. That was coordinating deliveries. Delivered 5 new garden beds with irrigation and lighting, upgraded waterproofing, which was a huge thing and one of our value propositions for this whole project, because the previous garden beds leaked into all the car parks that were underneath them. We planted 18 new trees, 5,000 native plantings, and constructed new seating. Next slide. But in terms of Victoria Point, this is our journey. So we actually started looking at this back in 2017, and that's when City of Melbourne launched their new Urban Forest Fund, which is a matched funding scheme for publicly accessible, privately owned land. So that was really what started us thinking about this. We actually undertook a lot of interim steps. We conducted with Plan Australia and VicPol a women's safety walk, and the purpose of that was to actually gather data into the design of the site. And it's still a significant document that's referred to. I won't go through the kind of steps, but this is really just to kind of outline to you. When you engage with external funders, it can really stretch out the timelines, because there's a series of things that you actually have to go through, and the project is not yours. So there's no such thing as free money, as we know. And so when you actually seek external funding, which we did considerably, we had funding from council, state government, federal government, and also the Queen's Jubilee grant. So each of those had to have their own set of requirements that we had to adhere to. Also into the mix, COVID, which not only stopped construction or activities, but the aftermath severely impacted the supply chain and also tripled construction costs. So that meant we actually had to go back to our funders and adjust the scope. So that's just part of the kind of reality. And we were very fortunate that we had very understanding and funders who took a partnership approach to us. Great. So next slide. So this is, I thought you'd be interested in kind of just seeing a snapshot of what happened. Because of the construction at Marble Stadium, we couldn't deal with all of our 5 garden beds at the one time. So we actually had to do one bed after another sequentially, which actually drew out the construction process. We also had to store the spoils on our slab as well. So weight with all the additional things coming in was a huge thing, really tricky, but we did it. It was also an eyes-on project, so everybody could walk around that. So I think we've gone back one slide. Yep, that's there. One of the things too, it was an eyes-on project, scrutinised by several layers of government. It also, people could see, the public could see what was happening all the way through. So next slide. One of the things that we knew was really important was that the end result wasn't the only thing that was important in this project. The way that we actually conducted the project was important. So our builders, DBG, removed the olive trees that were struggling in those old garden beds. They removed the concrete and recycled it. We reused that dead soil. They reconditioned it on site over several months. And we were very pleased when we saw it starting growing weeds. So that was a really highlight to kind of, and that was actually then reintroduced into the garden beds and supplemented. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned here too, one of the most important things was waterproofing. And I would suggest to you that's if you're doing anything that's not actually on the ground in apartment or residential strata, waterproofing is going to be critical for you to look at. Fortunately, as I said, a lot of the state government was very interested in that. So we had a lot of eyes on that and we have certification for that. We also installed seating, which was something that wasn't really there in the garden beforehand to kind of draw people in. Okay, next slide. So this is what these garden beds look like from an aerial perspective. As you can see, they kind of wrap around the residential tower. They also form a backdrop to some of the retail outlets. But we still have a lot of cement that's there, and that's what we're looking at the next stage. As mentioned, the attrition rate is very low, but it does have its challenges, as I said, with the crowds that come that sometimes don't treat the garden as much as we'd like them to treat the garden. Okay, next slide. The design. Now, again, I mentioned because we entered into funding agreements, we were directed to a significant percentage by the goals of the urban forest program, and that had specific requirements, particularly as regards native plantings. However, within that criteria, our landscape architects chose a theme from wetland to woodland, with the idea there that there were going to be undulating and changes in aspect. The planting palette was inspired by pre-colonial vegetation classes in Docklands, and we were very fortunate that the native species coverage up to 7 metres. I'm realising that I'm probably going over time, so we might just flick through some of these, the next slides. This is the planting palette, and I'm happy to share that with people afterwards. And if you move forward to the next one, and then to the next one. We also had detailed descriptions from Billy Nursery about this, and that was useful for engaging our residents in the scheme. So next slide. We also, and Kate, you can scroll through the next couple. We have statistics on each of the garden beds, and that was probably it. So that's what we've resulted in terms of benefit, and I'll go through these quickly again. Safety, wayfinding, and spatial amenity. Next slide. Biodiversity and the undulating planting actually are purposely designed to bring in different insects and species. Next slide. Heat island effect. The increase in coverage and also canopy cover is what we're looking for there. Now, we haven't had a very hot year in the last year, but you can tell already that the microclimate in the area has been improved. And it's also connecting our green space with other little pockets of green space. Next slide. Great, and this is the big thing, that we see this as just the beginning, as laying the foundation, and already our plan to go forward is to actually break the area into zones. So we've sectioned one off as a communal garden. We've got the front area as a peace park. Victoria Point is part of the International Institute for Peace for Tourism. How that manifests is a big question mark at the moment, but we're into seeing what an urban peace park could look like. Okay, next slide. Tips. My biggest tip is opportunity seeking, and let others know that you're interested in doing work. It's surprising where these things come up from. Be open to reshaping your goals to include others people's goals. For us, it was the urban forest. Till your ground. These things take a lot of time, and if you prep your own residents and owners corporation, then they're there when the opportunity presents itself. And partnerships. Connect with many. Ours included places like Billy Nursery, which is a specialist in native plantings. And I've got one final slide, which is tip for if there's any funders or councils on the call tonight, I would suggest to you strongly, if you could collate opportunities. We've got a number of different grants, as I said, but we had to go out and find them ourselves. So if you're interested in promoting these sort of things, if you can collate them on your websites. Ensure criteria is designed for OCs. There's been more than one set of grants that asks things of owners corporations that we don't actually have. For example, constitutions. We're not-for-profits have them, owners corporations don't. And be a partner and not a taskmaster. So I'll end there. Thanks very much, Kate.
Thanks so much, Janette. I've got about 1,000 questions, so I've made a few notes here for after the session. Thank you so much. And I'm going to introduce Geoff. Did you want me to drive the slides, Geoff, or are you happy? Did you want to take over?
No, I'll leave you to drive them.
Okay, no worries.
Fine. Thank you very much for having Fytogreen on. We're a specialist company that gets involved with architects and landscape architects to really resolve whether these things are possible. They're very easily drawn, but often very hard to deliver. So a big focus of Fytogreen is to actually make sure it's possible. A little bit of history. We're a company of 52 staff. We've been here for 22 years. We have a nursery in Melbourne, a nursery in Brisbane, and we really focus on only working on the built environment, so only on structure. We don't dig a hole in the dirt. But that's why we're here talking to you tonight. Some of the ways that you'd like to approach the greening of, I might go back a slide, Kate, if that's okay. You're going a bit quick for me. Thami touched on a lot of different things, and when you want to think about retrofitting, an apartment building, it's quite a difficult process because it's a matter of finding the services, making sure there's enough light, enough structure, and then delivering on whether you can drain or irrigate. We've developed many different techniques to tackle some of those problems, certainly around weight, but things that you can't change are light and services access. And for that, I mean drainage and irrigation. Next slide, thanks. A lot of projects throughout Melbourne, or Australia for that matter, have got Fytogreen's fingerprints all over it. I mean, we are certainly the leader in green walls. We've developed fire compliant versions and integrated with fire sprinklers. A project like you've got on the screen, which is Yukio and High Street. It's got fire sprinklers to either side. So it's different ways of approaching different scenarios. A lot easier as part of the construction phase, but not impossible as a post-fix. Things that are important, and certainly as the city gets denser and the light levels become more difficult, you really have to analyze what light you have available to make this possible. To grow plants in a temperate environment like Melbourne, where cold winters make some of our low light species a little bit more challenging in an outdoor environment, whereas indoors, it's a little bit more options available. Whenever we're doing an apartment project, we'll also do a wind analysis because it's all about the comfort. In simple terms, they'll do a pedestrian comfort analysis for people on a balcony. Plants also need the same consideration. So we're looking for meters per second to understand if we can design plants to work in that climatic condition. I talked a little bit about drainage and irrigation. Very easy in a new construction, a lot harder in a retrofit, but not impossible. And a big thing for Fytogreen is making sure that we can maintain a project. There's a number of projects that have been designed where maintenance was not really considered fully, and it makes the whole problem for the owners corp, quite substantial. So in today's world, we have far more buy-in from the architects, understanding that it needs to be accessible. Next slide. One that Thami spoke about, very first of the urban forest funding projects. It's it was a bit of a highlight for us, a challenge for sure, because we had COVID dropped itself in there not long after, so there was no funds, so it went unmaintained for a whole year. And the resilience of the design sort of stood up and carried it through. But there's 72 species in this particular garden, so we went to town. It was a great experience. Next slide. This touches a little bit about some options around retrofitting. So green roofs, Fytogreen is renowned for these sorts of projects. I think we have just under 900,000 square meters of our systems in Australia. So it's it's got a far and wide reach. On the top left, we've developed a system for greening metal deck roofs where we're limited by weight and the inability to put soil directly on a colorbond roof. This is really just about changing the eyeline vision from a window, and it's proved to be very successful. Fully hydroponic, very light, so it's only about 35 kilos a linear meter. But it's just changing the look rather than a substantial green. On the right-hand side, this is the, go back slide, there's the John Holland building in the CBD. It's just a thin profile, 150 mil garden on a part of the plant room setup. And once again, a wide diversity of species. It's important to know that from a design perspective, unless we've got reasonable light levels, you're really struggling for native providence limitations. So often we'll have a limit placed on us at 60%. Well, that's the objective, but in low light conditions, we're really struggling to achieve that in Australian native species, certainly in temperate Victoria. Bottom left was a substantial home we did in Sunshine Coast in Queensland. The whole building is covered in green roofs, so it was nice to have that freedom. I didn't, the owner certainly had a wonderful budget. Down the bottom middle, this is down in Flinders. This is where the bulk of the house is covered in a green roof. Very simple planting palette, but it just changes the outlook of the whole building. And then next slide, thanks. So this is a historical project, and unfortunately, the driver of this has passed away, but she was instrumental and very determined and managed to dig up some wonderful funding that got this whole project off the ground. There was a lot of challenges. The waterproofing was certainly past its use-by date. There was weight limitations. The moment we put a garden there, the balustrade became uncompliant and so on. But the whole complex got involved, and it turned it in from a very stark space into something that was quite livable and well used. Next slide. Planters, one of the simple things that you can do in apartments, be it, I don't have a lot of case studies in here from some of our balcony projects, but certainly, interior greening in the bottom centre, that's Melbourne Quarter, and we develop water reservoir systems that enable these to go, for a month, 4 to 6 weeks between services. The concrete planter boxes to the left, very common, but lots of inherent problems around waterproofing. So the drive today more and more is, we're placing aluminium planters, which is the bottom right, above and separate to the waterproof membrane, which delineates the point of risk and is becoming, more of a method of the future. Next slide. apartment project that we did many years ago at the Glen. So there was 3 particular towers, all with greening on the balconies. And, you know, that's done in a way that we wouldn't be able to do it today in today's world because of fire compliance, but certainly it's turned out to be a very successful project. And next slide. So this is where we get to play with a lot of our technology. On the left, we have a column in a commercial tower, but it could have been a residential tower. We have one coming up for a residential tower soon in Melbourne, where we've completely greened the column, which is all a structural element. Top right, it's a bit hard to see, but it's a foyer greening with our stalagmites, which just rise up out of the ground. There's a circular column to various heights, and a project that we've just finished in Queensland, which is the first of its type, where we've got our chandeliers hanging down from anywhere from 8 meters to 18 meters into an atrium space. And you know, it's taken 1.5 years late, but we've eventually got it in, and it's certainly creating some new precedents. Next slide. That's us. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Geoff. I was also just scribbling down some questions for you as well. So
well, not too many.
Time to ask my questions. We'll come to those momentarily. First, we're just going to hear briefly from Jane, who's going to tell us a little bit about My Smart Garden. Jane, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name's Jane Ward. I'm the Urban Agriculture Facilitator at Yarra City Council. And we're a partner with 10 other councils operating as a collective to run the My Smart Garden program. So this is a free program for residents of the participating councils, but there's actually nothing stopping you from joining up if you live in another council area. It's targeted to NAM or Melbourne climate, and we run regular workshops for residents, and it ranges hugely in variety, everything from preserving food through to growing food on a balcony space, so it can be very specific. And so part of coming here today was to let you know about it from the perspective of the resources that are available for people living either in small spaces or living with a balcony, and to come along and have a look. Well, I suggest that you join the newsletter, join up getting the newsletter, so then you can find out when any events are on. And on the slide here, it was just a few examples when I typed in the word balcony of the types of resources that you can look up and hear about some great case studies of residents that live in one of the areas, or people that are doing things out of polystyrene boxes and other found cheap sources for growing food. So yeah, that's the main thing that I wanted to spruik about. So yeah, please sign up to My Smart Garden so you can, and it's not just about growing food, it's also about growing habitat plants as well. And yeah, so thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks. Increasing our biodiversity is a really critical factor, I guess, for mitigating and adapting to climate change. So it's a very important conversation. All right, now I get to open up for questions. I did note there's one in there at the moment, which it feels like maybe Geoff or Janette might want to respond to, from Jackie. So she's just said, we've got a new 6-4 community garden in our apartment block. Wind has been an issue when trying to establish a planting. So any advice about mitigating the impact of wind at this level? They've got beds on the perimeter, they're managed by the OC, and they want to protect the community plantings within a set central bed.
It's a tough one. Without knowing the project or the location, I mean, it's in some of the Docklands projects, they've increased the balustrade height to 1.8 meters with glass to enable vision to be maintained, but some pedestrian comfort to be, allowed in that space. It's very hard if it's exposed. I think you could only just put some screens around any raised gardens to protect it from the southerly winds, which I imagine would be your main contributors.
Yep, great. Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Geoff. So my questions were, I was curious, Geoff, with your work that you do at Fytogreen, whether people want to look at food production as part of the projects that you do, or if it's more about a broader kind of greening.
Yeah, we're not strong on the food production side. Most of our systems are hydroponics, and we do veggie pods and veggie gardens on, apartment podium structures. So we set those up if they're part of the brief. But our particular systems in their own right are not ideally suited.
Yeah. Janette, I was curious, like that's a lot of work that went into what's been happening at Victoria Point, and I know you've been driving a lot of it as the kind of chair of the OC. Like how many? I mean, there was a huge amount of funding involved in the project, and it's obviously been really critical. But how many volunteer hours? Like it feels like there's been a huge amount of effort from yourself and presumably other residents in there. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all.
It's a passion project, and that's one of the things that, to do these major types of change projects, they have to be led by somebody who's invested in it. It can't be just kind of a good idea, because probably, even as was evident in the slide that I shared, there were so many times that we were on a knife edge that it really wasn't going to happen. The vote wasn't going to get through, the costs were there for too much, multiple times. And I'm not sure I have any advice about it, but it's more about speaking to the people that do have a passion for it, and you're going, you just really have to dig in and decide that you're going to do it. And you find the people around that are willing to come with you on that journey. It might be different people at different stages, but yeah, that's a number of hours. Like, we've all done grant acquittals. We've all done grant variations. I got to say, the smaller the grant, the harder it is to vary. So it takes a long time. We had, hundreds of meetings with different people and things that didn't come off. I've just shared the ones that did come off. There are a lot of ones that didn't come off as well. So that probably doesn't answer it all, but yeah, it's just one of those things you've just got to decide to do it.
Yeah. And obviously, that process of kind of selling or marketing the idea internally was a big part of what you had to do in those planning stages. I'm curious about whether the feedback has been, people feel like they're getting those benefits that you sort of, that you would have been selling and promoting, or is it?
So different groups, different benefits. Waterproofing, big tick. That solved a big problem. We were going to have to do that anyway. And so it became, as I said, a package deal to be able to go, if we're going to demolish the garden beds, we'll put that in there. Now you'd kind of think that would be a lay down misere to say, sure, you'll do it at the same time, but it cost a lot to redo them. We could have just demolished them and fixed up the waterproofing. Do people feel that they've got, yeah, to a certain extent, the ones that are interested in it, the ones that like to kind of see nature come back. Unfortunately, some people see it as a very convenient, pet urination trough. So, that's how you deal with that. And it's not just residents, it's people walking their dogs. It's certainly much more green, even though I said we had beds there before, they were stark. And now with the zones that we're going through, people, it's a resident-led communal garden that's starting up. They've also already applied for a micro grant, which they've got from external funding. So it's kind of sharing that about, you can do it. This is there. Take ownership of it. It's yours.
Yeah, that's great. Thami, you've been a researcher in this space, so you have a really nice macro view. Do you think we're getting better at this in Melbourne? Like, are we starting to see more and more of these sorts of projects? Are people sort of starting to do this greening, do you think, in a better way?
We've been puttering along. We've definitely got, just that section of the market that one screening on their buildings, and incrementally that's starting to be quite impressive. And maybe those examples are driving a little bit, but I feel like we're still potentially on the runway. The scale of opportunity in front of us is vast. And just the example of Janette doing that patch in Docklands and how hard it still is to get things like that done is an example of how long we have to go. But I think we're close to takeoff, perhaps. I saw a new planning scheme amendment which is coming for the City of Melbourne, which will actually require greening on new buildings. And if that lands and it's as well designed as it looks, it could actually drive a massive increase of greening. And I think incrementally we'll see greenery around us more and more in a way that starts to normalize it, and things might take off.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think with the kind of, the priority for biodiversity and nature positive kind of at a federal level, maybe we'll start to see the level of investment we need. Feels like the apartment sector is a really clear kind of cohort that could help drive some of that potentially, which would be interesting. I'm just picking up some questions here. Sandra's actually just made a comment about a little bit about wind, I think, just saying that they've used bamboo at the perimeter of beds to protect other plants as a bit of a windbreak, or little shrubs and trees that hedge. So she's got a feijoa and 2 bay trees providing. So she's got, again, multiple purpose planting going on there. Geoff, we've just got a question about Westbury Street as well. So saying it's been about 10 years since the garden was completed. How's it performed? Has it required more than expected maintenance? And have any sections had to be replanted? I don't know if you've got insight into how it's all been performing after the initial planting?
Yeah, no, our contact with the project fell away when Sonia unfortunately died. But they did have an irrigation failure where unfortunately mice had chewed through the control wires for the irrigation and nobody noticed. So we did get a call out to try and to rectify the irrigation. And I mean, that irrigation failure certainly affected some of the plantings, but that was 2 years ago. So we haven't heard anything from them since.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know quite who the driver is now, unfortunately. Sonia was the driver. So, it's one of those things. I think Janette talked about it. You've got to have a passionate driver to make these things happen. And that's what's required to even maintain the activity going forth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it, when you've got that champion? Absolutely. We are developing case studies as part of High Life Expo, so maybe we can see if we can chase someone up from the project. There's another question here. So we've talked about a lot about the benefits. So we've talked about peace, we've talked about cooling, we've talked about biodiversity. Is there any evidence that greening roofs and walls can alleviate flood risk for apartment buildings? There's a question on there.
Got to get that waterproofing right first.
So not to, hopefully not elevate flood risk anyway, but alleviating.
I many years ago traveled to Rotterdam, which of course has got sections below sea level, and they are very assertive about using green roofs to manage flood risk. And one of the things that they designed, which was quite fascinating, was a green roof with a sort of series of almost inverted traffic cones underneath the substrate. So it would basically act as a reservoir, just like a giant wicking bed. And this thing could soak up so much stormwater and hold it. I mean, obviously that would have required enormous structural strength. I think it was on top of a car park, and car parks do tend to be really quite strong. But green roofs are probably one of our best shots at dealing with flood risk in inner Melbourne in particular, where we're 83% asphalt and concrete. We're going to need to tear up hectares and hectares of that somewhere, and if we look for it in the streets, we're going to have a real battle, whereas there's loads of rooftops that could potentially be playing that role on big buildings in the city. So yeah, it's not really something I've seen here, but the Dutch are really onto it.
Yeah, great.
Look it up. It's called the I think it's called the Duck Akker, if you wanted to try and find that case study. I'll see if I can pop it in the chat.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Thami.
Hey, as a simple rule of thumb, I mean, an extensive green roof, which is only 160 mils deep, that'll absorb a 50 mil rain event. And it's all about the defraying of water movement to the outlet rather than solving the problem.
Yeah, which is the concept of rain gardens on the ground, though, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the rain gardens on the ground, but that's all for, for stripping nutrients that we don't want in the waterways, heavy metals.
Yeah, yeah. Got another question from Robin here, which is asking about, is there a way of using plants to shade a large northern window looking onto a balcony in the summer? Anyone got a recommendation there?
Are the plants indoors or inside the window or outside the window?
Great question. I'm not sure. I'll see if Robin wants to respond type into the Q&A. Here we go. Outside. There she goes, on the balcony.
Okay, on a balcony that one can access. So, it just depends on how much room you've got, but there are a number of callistemons that are very slim, like Slim John, etc., that will work in a very exposed space, but they'll still need a planter box with at least 400 mils of width and 500 mils of depth.
I've seen a great example with scarlet runners protecting a northern window, because they're a 7-year bean.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's what my mum's putting in. My mum's just moved into an apartment and she's just working out what she can do in a very, very small space at the moment in Darebin. I think that brings us to a close. So I'd like to obviously say Nun Gudjin, which is thank you in Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country language. And, just a huge thank you to you all for joining us here tonight. It's been really great conversation. I really enjoyed looking at all those really beautiful pictures and imagining what Melbourne could look like in the future. As I've mentioned, so the High Life Expo wasn't just one event and a few kind of ancillary online events. We've also got a website full of lots of case studies and other resources on the website. So just encouraging everyone, if you want to continue this Sustainable Strata journey, to jump onto the website, sign up to the newsletter. We absolutely will not spam. It'll only be about telling you about potential events or maybe funding opportunities and those sorts of things. Janette, there is one last event that we've got scheduled at the moment, which is coming up on Monday the 17th, which I've just realised is Monday next week. And that's all about getting to, so that idea around navigating that good decision-making in owners corporation. So we started touching on it with Janette's project a little bit today, but that idea around getting everyone on board and keeping them on board throughout a project like this is a really critical part of that. So please jump on and register for that event, or otherwise the recording will be up on the website as well following. I'm just going to double check that I haven't missed. Oh, yep. And we also have an evaluation as part of this. So if you've used Menti before, it's really easy. So if you just grab your phones out at the moment, it'll take you, I think there's 3 questions on the evaluation form. We'd love you to fill it out. Just to scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. If not, you can also, we'll send you out an email after this. Obviously, we'll have the link in there. If you do fill out the evaluation form, you'll go into the draw to win a $150 voucher for Mabu Mabu, which if you're located in the CBD or find it easy, you can go and enjoy a really great meal. Otherwise, they've got an online store where you could actually get some native bush foods and things delivered. You'll also get a copy of Tim Forsey's My Efficient Electric Home Handbook, which is just about to launch, very hot off the press. But yeah, we'd love your feedback. Tell us all the other things you want to talk about, conversations, resources, all those sorts of things, important information for us going forward. And as I mentioned, Nun Gudjin, thank you all very much. And we have finished pretty much right on time. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Bye.